So, uh, imagine walking into this grand ancient cathedral. You're standing in the nave and you're just looking up at these massive, unyielding stone pillars.
Oh, right, like a Gothic cathedral.
Yeah, exactly. You've got these vaulted ceilings that seem to just uh, defy gravity entirely. Intricate stained glass that has somehow survived centuries of violent storms.
It's all about permanence.
Right. You are marveling at the architecture, the sheer undeniable permanence of the whole structure. And then somebody just like taps you on the shoulder.
Okay.
They hand you a flashlight, they point down at the floor, and they just casually mention that the entire building is actually resting on a rotting swamp.
Wow, that is quite the visual.
Yeah, I mean, they tell you the pillars are structurally compromised, the foundation is just slowly but inevitably sinking right into the mud. And the worst part, the priests at the altar are the ones actively pumping the water in.
Right, they're causing the flood.
Exactly. So what do? Do you trust the original architects who built it to last forever? Or do you grab a crowbar and just start desperately tearing up the floorboards to see the rot for yourself?
It's a terrifying premise, honestly.
It really is.
That visceral moment of realizing the ground beneath your feet, the very social, legal, and cultural structures you rely on, might not be as solid as you've always assumed. I mean, it forces a complete uncomfortable paradigm shift.
And that profound sense of civilizational vertigo is, well, it's exactly where we're starting today. Welcome back to another deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Today's mission is exploring a highly provocative, deeply controversial, and just widely discussed 2026 ebook. It's titled Patriots and Prophets, Restoring the Rational Patriarchy to Save a Dying Western Civilization.
Quite the title.
Oh yeah, it's written by Conrad Riker, and let me tell you, having read through the source material, this text does not pull a single punch, like at all.
Far from it. To properly frame our source material for today, you really need to understand that this book is a dense, unapologetic, and highly structured manifesto.
Yeah, a manifesto is definitely the right word for it.
It essentially serves as a comprehensive manual. It details the philosophical, biological, and historical arguments of the modern men's rights movement.
And the what they call the manosphere, right?
Exactly, the colloquially termed red-pilled manosphere. Riker isn't just writing a critique here. He is offering a top-to-bottom teardown of modern society.
Right.
And he pairs that with a militant blueprint for men who feel, well, entirely alienated by that society.
Now, before we venture down this particular rabbit hole, we really need to issue a crucial mandatory disclaimer. I mean, we have to get this out of the way.
Absolutely essential.
We are dealing with some of the most intense cultural and political fault lines of our era, like highly charged stuff. So today, our objective is to impartially unpack the author's highly politically charged arguments.
Just unpack them, nothing else.
Right. We are not taking sides here. We are not endorsing these views, nor were we condemning them. Our goal, literally, our only goal, is strictly to help you, the listener, understand the framework.
The historical claims, the concept.
Yeah, the incredibly specific ideas contained in this text. We are just, your guides through the architecture of Riker's argument.
It is so vital to separate the analysis of an argument from the endorsement of it. We are looking strictly at the how and the why of his claims.
Exactly.
We're just examining the internal logic of the world he describes.
And look, if you find this exploration fascinating, if you're the kind of person who prefers to see the original arguments for themselves.
Unedited.
Yeah, unedited and straight from the source, which we always recommend doing, by the way. You should absolutely check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy the ebook, Patriots and Prophets.
We highly encourage reading the primary source material to form your own conclusions. You really have to see it to fully grasp the tone.
Oh, 100%. You can also follow the author directly to see his ongoing thesis at Conrad Riker on Substack.
And hey, while we're talking about supporting things, take a second right now to like and subscribe to our deep dive.
Yes, please do. It's the best way to support the rigorous research we do to put these deep dives together for you.
All right, so our core mission today is to deconstruct Riker's central thesis.
Right, let's get into it.
It's this idea that Western institutions were historically built by male philosophical frameworks.
Which he sees as the ultimate bedrock, right?
Yes, the ultimate bedrock of objective reality. And he claims these very institutions have been systematically captured, dismantled, and corrupted by what he vividly terms a gynocentric matrix.
Gynocentric matrix. Okay, let's unpack this matrix. We have to start where Riker starts, which is the foundational bedrock of his entire worldview. biology.
Biology is everything to him.
Right. Riker makes this absolute, uncompromising argument that biology dictates reality. Full stop. He dismisses the idea of social constructs entirely.
He doesn't even entertain them.
No. He argues that Western civilization was built on a patriarchal inheritance of objective truth. And he's pulling from some, heavy historical hitters to build this lineage.
Oh, he really is. He's naming Aristotle's logic, John Locke's empiricism.
Isaac Newton's physics.
Right, and Thomas Aquinas' theology. He views these men not just as historical figures, but as the literal architects of reason itself.
What is genuinely fascinating here is how he maps that ancient philosophy right onto modern cultural warfare.
Yes, he takes St. Augustine's famous theological concept from the 5th century.
The city of God and the city of man.
Exactly. Augustine divided humanity into those two cities. But Riker updates this framework for the 21st century. He creates a new, very rigid dichotomy.
So what are his two cities?
On one side, you have the city of Logos. Now, Logos in classical Greek philosophy represents reason, logic, the rational order of the universe.
Like the underlying principle that just makes sense of the chaos.
Right. For Riker, the city of Logos is the masculine inheritance. It is defined by objective truth, natural law, mathematics, and strict empirical rigor.
He paints it as this uncompromising fortress of facts. So,
Yeah.
what is the opposing force? What is storming the gates of Logos in his mind?
He posits the city of Pathos.
Pathos, which is an appeal to emotion.
Yes.
Mhm.
Riker defines the city of Pathos as a manufactured gynocentric, meaning female-centered reality.
Okay.
He describes it as a chaotic wasteland of subjective emotion, where, in his view, hard empirical facts are violently suppressed the moment they threaten or offend female sensitivities.
So he essentially codes logic and structure as inherently masculine.
Yes, and emotional volatility and consensus seeking as inherently feminine.
Wow. Okay, so his premise is that the West was built on the masculine city of Logos, but we are currently living in the collapsing, irrational ruins of the feminine city of Pathos.
That's his exact framing, yes.
But here's where my brain immediately snags on his logic. If these gender differences are biologically absolute, if men are just hardwired for logic and women for emotion, as he claims,
Right.
how does Riker explain the massive cultural shift toward equality? If the patriarchy was perfectly rational and biologically natural, how does he view the modern left's logic for dismantling it?
It's a great question.
How did the left supposedly convince everyone to just abandon ship?
Riker attacks that exact question using formal logic. He claims that modern leftist ideology, particularly feminism, hasn't actually won a logical debate.
They haven't.
No. He argues it relies entirely on a foundational logical fallacy, specifically petitio principii, commonly known as begging the question.
Ah, okay, the circular reasoning trap.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He breaks down their overarching cultural argument into a strict syllogism to expose what he sees as its total intellectual bankruptcy.
Okay, let's test that logic. How does he actually construct this syllogism? I want to see the steps.
All right, Riker maps it out like this. Premise 1 of the leftist argument is the assumption that women have been historically oppressed by a patriarchal system.
Okay, premise 1.
Premise 2 is the assumption that a patriarchal system inherently and universally privileges men above all else.
All right, I'm following.
Therefore, their conclusion is that men today experience systemic privilege and must be dismantled.
Oh, I see the trap he's pointing out. The conclusion is literally just restating the initial unproven premises.
Yes, precisely.
It's like a rigged casino where the house edge is built into the definition of the game itself.
Yeah.
If you walk up to the blackjack table, you've already agreed you're going to lose.
That is a perfect analogy for how he views modern discourse. It's a closed circular loop.
Right.
Riker argues this pseudo-intellectual logic completely ignores empirical reality and historical context by assuming patriarchy is nothing but a mechanism of oppression,
You inevitably arrive at the conclusion that men are privileged oppressors.
without ever actually proving the initial premise through objective, observable data.
So he thinks they're just skipping the proof part entirely. Does he offer his own data to counter it?
He does. For example, he points to historical male death rates in wars, workplace fatalities in dangerous industries, and lower life expectancies across the board.
To show what? That men suffer too.
To show that this empirical data shatters the systemic privilege premise. To Riker, this circular reasoning isn't just a mistake in their logic.
It's not an accident.
No, it is the deliberate, foundational operating system of the gynocentric matrix.
Man, he really views modern academia's shift away from classical logic, away from Aristotle's organon, as just pure intellectual suicide.
Yes.
Reading this section, it felt like he was describing a crew trying to navigate a massive ocean liner after they literally threw the compass overboard because someone decided the needle pointing north was somehow offensive.
That's a very Riker way to put it, honestly.
And now they're just steering the ship based on how the waves make them feel, and then they're shocked when they hit a reef.
And to correct that course, he contrasts our modern state heavily with the Platonic ideal.
Okay, bringing Plato into it.
Right. He spends considerable time on Plato's concept of the philosopher king. This is this ancient ideal of a ruler who governs not through whim or emotion, but through absolute, unyielding dedication to reason and truth.
But Riker isn't just talking about a literal king ruling a country, right?
No, he applies this macro-political concept to the micro level of the home.
The family unit.
Yes. He insists that the rational man is biologically intended to be the philosopher king of his own domestic sphere.
So Riker is arguing that the external order of a massive society is merely a reflection of the internal order of the individual household.
Yes, the ancient Greeks termed this domestic unit the oikos.
Oikos, okay.
Aristotle argued at length that the oikos must be strictly hierarchical to function properly at all. The male head governs through rational authority, protecting and providing for the subordinates who, in turn, follow his direction.
And Riker believes that severing this specific domestic hierarchy is what brings down the broader civilization.
That's his core sociological claim, yes.
But Riker points out, with a lot of vitriol, like a real sense of anger, that modern society openly mocks this concept of male domestic authority.
Oh, he hates how it's portrayed.
Yeah, he uses a very specific, recognizable pop culture phenomenon to illustrate this. The trope of the bumbling dad.
The sitcom dad.
Right. He points to characters like Homer Simpson or Peter Griffin or really, any sitcom dad from the last 30 years.
It's a very common trope.
It is. He notes that the primary depiction of the American father in media has devolved into this overweight, incompetent, emotionally stunted fool.
Who constantly has to be rescued.
Exactly. Rescued, managed, or just barely tolerated by his hyper-competent, long-suffering wife.
And crucial to his thesis is that Riker doesn't see this as harmless comedy. He doesn't think it's just mere entertainment for a laugh.
What did he think it is?
He frames it as a highly calculated cultural programming campaign.
A campaign to do what?
The objective, according to the text, is to subtly undermine male authority in the eyes of the next generation. It's designed to convince young women they are inherently better equipped to rule a chaotic household alone.
Than to submit to the rational leadership of a man.
Right, and conversely, to convince young men that incompetence is just their natural state. It establishes male buffoonery as the default societal assumption.
But, you can't just change the foundational structure of a whole civilization with cartoons and sitcoms.
No, culture is downstream of other things.
Exactly. If the cultural foundation shifted that drastically, the legal structure must have cracked first. Because to displace the philosopher king, you need to change the laws. You need to change the economics.
And that is exactly where Riker goes next.
Right. Where does Riker say the actual structural load-bearing walls of the family were knocked down?
This is where Riker moves from abstract philosophy into very dense legislative history. He argues that the systematic dismantling of the nuclear family wasn't some accident of culture.
It was engineered.
Yes, engineered by the state, starting primarily in the 1960s. He highlights two very specific historical pivot points that he claims literally broke the back of the patriarchy.
Okay, let's look at those pivot points. What's the first one? Let's get specific.
First, he points to 1969. This is when California Governor Ronald Reagan signed the Family Law Act.
Okay, what did that act actually do?
This piece of legislation introduced the concept of unilateral, no-fault divorce to the United States.
Meaning you could dissolve a marriage without proving any legal wrongdoing by your partner, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like adultery, abandonment, or abuse.
Exactly. You didn't need a reason recognized by the court.
You could just decide you weren't happy and leave.
Exactly that. Riker argues this single legislative act removed the legal necessity of commitment.
It changed the definition of marriage.
It fundamentally transformed marriage from a foundational societal pillar like a lifelong covenant enforced by law and community into an easily revocable emotion-based contract.
Wow. So suddenly the state legally incentivized the displacement of the father.
Yes, and the second major pivot point he cites is Lyndon B. Johnson's Great Society legislation.
1964 stuff.
Right, specifically the Economic Opportunity Act of 1964 and the massive expansion of the welfare state.
Now here's where the book takes a massive highly controversial leap, like a really big one. Riker doesn't just say these policies were well-intentioned ideas that unfortunately had bad outcomes for families.
No, he goes much further into the deep end.
He claims they intentionally incentivized hypergamy and engineered mass fatherlessness. How on earth does he justify the claim that welfare policies were specifically designed to replace husbands?
He synthesizes this using a deeply cynical application of evolutionary psychology. Riker introduces the concept of hypergamy to his readers.
Okay, define hypergamy in his terms.
He defines it as the biological reality that women are evolutionarily wired to seek male provision, protection, and status.
So they are always looking upward.
Right, constantly looking to upgrade to a higher status mate if possible. Historically, civilization managed this raw instinct through the institution of marriage.
Okay, so marriage was the control mechanism.
Yes. Men provided resources and physical protection in exchange for absolute fidelity and a stable family structure to raise their genetic offspring.
And Riker uses the stark manosphere terminology here, right?
Very stark. He contrasts what he calls beta bucks with alpha fucks.
Right. Beta bucks being the reliable, hardworking men who provide resources.
And alpha fucks being the high status, exciting, physically dominant, but often unreliable or even predatory men.
Okay, those terms are incredibly blunt. But I understand they form the core vernacular of the movement he's speaking to.
Yes, you can't understand the book without understanding those terms.
But I really need to push back on the application here. Isn't a welfare state just a safety net for vulnerable people? Like, how does he logically connect government assistance to women chasing these high-risk alpha men?
Well, Riker claims the state safety net effectively severed a woman's biological and economic dependency on a male provider.
By taking over the provider role.
Exactly. Because the government stepped in to guarantee financial security, providing housing, food stamps, and welfare checks, regardless of a woman's marital choices, women were suddenly freed from the biological necessity of securing a reliable, hardworking husband.
Because the state just absorbed all the risk of bad choices.
That's his argument. Therefore, he claims, they were heavily incentivized to pursue their basest short-term instincts.
Chasing the excitement.
Chasing those high-risk alpha men for genetic material or excitement without worrying about long-term provision. And when those high-risk men inevitably abandon the mothers, the state steps in as the surrogate husband.
And the darkest part of his theory, the way he ties it all together.
Oh, the funding mechanism.
Yeah. The state funds this by extracting wealth via taxes from the very reliable, hardworking men who are bypassing the dating market to begin with.
It's a brutal economic perspective.
So, in his view, the state literally replaced the husband. The government became the ultimate, inescapable surrogate provider. And he backs this up with demographic data, right?
He does rely on some stark statistics.
Yeah, he notes that in 1964, right before LBJ's policies took full effect, the out-of-wedlock birth rate in the U.S. was hovering around, 7%?
Just about 7%, yes.
And today, it's pushing nearly 40%. He draws a direct, unbroken causal line from those specific welfare policies to that statistical explosion.
He does. And to bolster this causal link, he heavily relies on the 1965 Moynihan Report.
Okay, for context, Daniel Patrick Moynihan was an American sociologist, and he later became a U.S. senator.
Right. He authored a very famous report for the Department of Labor. Moynihan warned that the breakdown of the nuclear family, specifically the alarming rise of fatherless households in urban centers, would inevitably lead to systemic, generational crime, poverty, and educational failure.
And Moynihan said this would happen regardless of how much money the government just pumped into those communities.
Exactly.
It was a massive sociological warning flare. But Riker says Moynihan was actively silenced. Why?
Well, Riker claims Moynihan applied objective, Aristotelian observation, meaning logos to a looming sociological crisis.
He looked at the facts.
But the ideological left, who Riker says operate entirely in the city of pathos, couldn't tolerate the harsh reality of his findings because it conflicted with their emotional narrative.
It hurt their feelings, essentially.
Right. Riker argues they initiated a gynocentric cover-up. They buried the report and destroyed Moynihan's reputation by accusing him of blaming the victim.
So objective observation was sacrificed at the altar of emotional sensitivity.
That is Riker's exact framing.
Riker uses a really vivid, somewhat agonizing hypothetical to explain the modern economic reality of this whole system. He introduces a character he calls Mark the Engineer.
Ah, yes, more.
Mark is your quintessential City of Logos citizen. He's rational, he works 50 hours a week, he pays his bills, he stays out of trouble.
He does everything society tells him to do.
Right. But every April, Mark looks at his tax bill and feels this visceral, burning rage. Mark realizes that a massive percentage of his labor, literally thousands of hours of his finite life, is forcefully confiscated by the IRS.
And where does Riker say that money goes?
According to the book, Mark is looking out his window, realizing his confiscated wealth is being redistributed to subsidize the lives of women who aggressively rejected him in their 20s.
Rejected him in favor of unemployed, volatile bad boys.
Yes, Mark the engineer is, in Riker's incredibly provocative phrasing, cuckolded by the IRS.
It is a deliberately inflammatory way to frame taxation. I mean, obviously.
Very.
But it serves to perfectly illustrate his thesis of state-sponsored wealth extraction. And Riker insists this isn't a new phenomenon at all.
No, he goes way back into history for this one.
He connects it directly to the fall of the Roman Republic. He brings up the Lex Frumentaria from 123 BC.
Okay, let's break that down for the listener. What exactly was the Lex Frumentaria?
It was a pivotal law pushed by the Roman tribune Gaius Gracchus. It allowed the Roman government to buy grain and sell it at heavily subsidized, below market prices directly to the plebeian masses in Rome.
So early government welfare.
Right. And Riker points out that this wasn't an act of noble charity on Gracchus's part. It was a coldly calculated political transaction.
He was buying votes.
Exactly. Gracchus used the public treasury to buy loyalty and breed absolute dependency among the voting bloc. Over time, the Roman citizens viewed the grain dole not as a gift, but as an absolute right.
And Riker argues the modern welfare state is executing the exact same playbook today.
But with a gendered twist.
Right. By specifically targeting women with state resources to break their reliance on men, the state makes them permanently dependent on the government's political apparatus.
Guaranteeing a permanent voting bloc for the political left.
It's an incredibly sweeping theory of economic manipulation, but, it begs a massive question.
Which is
A society doesn't just wake up one Tuesday and decide to dissolve the nuclear family, embrace hypergamy, and replace fathers with federal agencies. That doesn't just happen overnight.
No, of course not.
For such a massive structural shift to be accepted by the public without a literal violent revolution, a massive cultural conditioning program had to occur in the background. Someone had to write the code for this cultural programming to make people actually want these changes.
Who changed the minds?
Right. Who does Riker blame for that psychological warfare?
That question is the bridge to his historical deep dive on ideological subversion. Riker traces the origins of this attack on the patriarchy directly back to Marxist critical theory.
Specifically focusing on the evolution of the Frankfurt School, right?
Yes, he is heavily focused on the Frankfurt School.
I really want to trace his exact timeline here because he is meticulous about laying out this history to prove his point. Where does he say the very first seed was planted?
He starts the timeline in 1884 with Friedrich Engels. Engels was Karl Marx's closest collaborator, and he wrote a book titled The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State.
Okay, 1884.
Riker argues this text laid the crucial groundwork for viewing the nuclear family not as a natural biological unit, but as an oppressive capitalist structure designed to control wealth.
So the family is just a mini capitalist enterprise to Engels.
Right. Then Riker moves the timeline forward to 1919 and focuses on Georgy Lukács.
Okay, who was Lukács and why is he so pivotal to Riker's theory?
Lukács was a brilliant Marxist thinker who briefly served as the Commissar for Culture during the short-lived Hungarian Soviet Republic.
Okay.
Lukács realized something profound. The working class, the proletariat, they were not naturally rising up to overthrow capitalism as Marx had predicted.
They weren't revolting. Why?
Because, Lukács realized, their souls were anchored by Western cultural institutions, primarily Christian theology and the patriarchal family structure.
Meaning they had too much to lose.
Nah. Exactly. A man who feels a deep divine duty to provide for his wife and children is inherently conservative. He will not risk his family's stability to become a radical revolutionary.
So Lukács believed that to achieve a communist revolution, you first had to destroy those cultural anchors.
You had to sever them.
Because if you sever a man's connection to his family and his faith, he becomes completely unmoored. He becomes atomized, desperate prime material for a state revolution.
That is the exact logic, and this theoretical framework finds a permanent home and permanent funding in 1923.
Enter the Frankfurt School.
Yes. A wealthy Marxist named Felix Weil helps establish the Institute for Social Research at Goethe University in Frankfurt, Germany. This becomes known globally as the Frankfurt School.
And Riker lays out their historical logic in a very clear, chilling syllogism. Let's walk through it.
Premise 1. Karl Marx predicted an inevitable economic revolution in advanced capitalist nations.
Premise 2. This economic revolution completely failed to occur because the workers were just too comfortable.
Premise 3. Therefore, cultural institutions must be systematically weakened to make the population susceptible to revolution.
Premise 4. The patriarchal family is the absolute strongest cultural institution.
The inescapable conclusion: the patriarchal family must be destroyed for socialist goals to be realized.
Wow. So, when the war against capital failed, they simply changed the battlefield. It became a war against the family.
They substituted the bourgeoisie with men and the proletariat with women.
It became about gender struggle instead of class struggle. But I have to ask, what does a 1920s Marxist philosophy seminar in Germany actually mean for the average person scrolling through their phone today?
How does it connect to now?
Yeah. Riker constantly uses this term NPC, non-player character. For those who don't know, it's a video game term for background character, completely controlled by the computer's programming, incapable of independent thought.
Right.
How does Frankfurt School theory create what he calls a modern zombie horde of NPCs?
To bridge the gap from 1920s academia to modern Twitter mobs, Riker points to the philosopher Herbert Marcuse.
Marcuse.
Okay. Marcuse was associated with the Frankfurt School, and he became incredibly influential in the American New Left during the 1960s. Riker specifically targets Marcuse's 1965 essay, Repressive Tolerance.
Repressive tolerance?
Yeah.
That sounds like an oxymoron.
It is. In this essay, Marcuse argued a highly paradoxical point, that tolerance of the status quo, which Riker translates as tolerance of the rational patriarchy and biological reality, is itself a form of systemic oppression.
Okay, so tolerating normal things is oppressive.
Therefore, Marcuse argued, true liberation requires absolute intolerance of right-wing, traditional, or conservative movements.
Let me make sure I'm grasping this. It's like a referee in a football game deciding that because the blue team has won too many championships historically, true fairness means the red team is allowed to tackle the blue team's players before the ball is even snapped.
That's a good way to look at it.
And if the blue team complains about being tackled early, they get penalized for complaining. It basically gave people intellectual permission to be completely viciously intolerant of traditionalism while simultaneously claiming the moral high ground.
That is precisely how Riker interprets it. He claims this essay handed the modern left an epistemological blank check.
Epistemology being the study of how we know what is true.
Right. By declaring traditional truth as inherently oppressive, Marcuse allowed the left to silence biological reality and enforce pseudoscience.
Because the truth was deemed harmful.
Exactly. It created a framework where objective facts logos are viewed as acts of violence, and subjective feelings, pathos, are elevated to unquestionable moral superiority.
And Riker argues this philosophy trickled down from the universities into the HR departments, into the media, into the entertainment industry, creating these NPCs.
Yes. Riker describes these NPCs as nodes in a synchronized hive mind network.
Just blindly following the code.
They are people who don't operate on rational thought or empirical evidence, but on synchronized social programming. When a target is identified by the media or academia, they act in unison to attack any dissenting rational thought.
He describes it as narcissistic, irresponsible violence.
Yes. And he claims they are entirely unaware that their outrage is artificially manufactured.
And, Riker doesn't just leave this as abstract theory. He provides a really intense, incredibly detailed case study of this hive mind in action.
The Kavanaugh hearings.
Yes, the confirmation hearings of Supreme Court Justice Brett Kavanaugh. Riker views this entire explosive political event as the ultimate terrifying manifestation of the NPC hive mind.
He spends an entire chapter on it.
He says they were just discarding Enlightenment due process in favor of evidence-free emotional terrorism.
He frames it as a pure dialectical battle between the two cities. On one side, you have the city of Logos, represented by the Enlightenment principles of John Locke and classical jurisprudence.
The presumption of innocence, the absolute requirement for corroborating evidence, the pursuit of objective truth.
And on the other side, you have the city of Pathos, represented by the feminist imperative and the mob.
Right. Riker notes repeatedly that Christine Blasey Ford's allegations against Kavanaugh had zero corroborating evidence.
None.
No witnesses who could confirm the event, shifting timelines. Yet the mob demanded Kavanaugh's complete personal and professional destruction based solely on the emotional resonance of her accusation.
And he specifically names peripheral figures in that circus, like the lawyer Michael Avenatti and his client Julie Swetnick.
Oh, right. Swetnick made increasingly outlandish claims that Kavanaugh was running high school gang rape rings.
Along with Deborah Ramirez's hazy allegations, Riker says it didn't matter one bit that these claims completely fell apart under basic legal scrutiny.
Or that people faced perjury referrals.
Because the goal wasn't truth. The goal was saturation bombing the target with enough noise and emotional hysteria to destroy him.
And to intimidate any other man who might stand for traditional order.
Exactly. And he drives his point home by exposing what he sees as the ultimate cynical hypocrisy. He contrasts the Kavanaugh outrage with the left's fervent defense of President Bill Clinton in the 1990s.
Oh, right. Let's look at that syllogism he constructs. Premise 1, the left claims to unconditionally believe women and condemn sexual misconduct.
Premise 2, Ford's allegation against Kavanaugh lacked corroborating evidence.
Premise 3, the left demanded Kavanaugh's rejection.
Premise 4, the left simultaneously defended and celebrated Clinton against multiple heavily corroborated allegations of sexual misconduct and perjury.
So what's his conclusion from that contrast?
His conclusion is that the leftist position isn't driven by justice, morality, or a desire to protect women.
What is it driven by then?
It is driven purely by ideological utility. It is raw, unprincipled power masked as moral outrage.
Man. So Riker paints this incredibly bleak, suffocating picture of the modern landscape. The modern man is intellectually besieged by cultural Marxism in the universities.
He is legally and economically besieged by the welfare state and the IRS.
He is culturally mocked by the media and entertainment complex. The city of Logos is basically burning and the gates are breached.
It's a very dire assessment.
So what on earth is Riker's prescriptive advice? Because he doesn't just complain for 400 pages, he offers a manual. How does the rational patriarch fight back when he is this surrounded?
Well, Riker argues that you cannot change a collapsing macro system until you master the microsystem.
You have to fix yourself first.
Right. The first step in reclaiming civilization is ruthlessly reclaiming your own mind and body from the matrix. He starts this prescriptive section by viciously attacking what he calls the cult of vulnerability.
Okay, I found this section fascinating because it cuts completely against the grain of modern therapy. He goes after the whole men need to open up, be vulnerable, and cry narrative.
He despises it.
He frames the modern societal demand for men to be emotionally vulnerable as a civilizational shit test.
It's a crucial concept to understand his worldview. A shit test is a term heavily utilized in the manosphere.
What does it mean exactly?
It essentially describes a psychological test, usually subconsciously deployed by a woman, designed to gauge a man's true strength, confidence, or compliance. Riker views the entire therapeutic industrial complex, the HR departments, the media campaigns, the therapists telling men to bare their souls and cry, as a weaponized societal-level trap.
A trap designed to do what, though?
To locate and neutralize masculine power. The culture explicitly demands that men open up, but Riker argues that the reality is entirely different.
Because it's a test.
Right. He claims that the moment a man actually displays genuine vulnerability, fear, or weakness, society, and particularly the women in his life, react with subconscious, visceral disgust.
So they ask for it, but they secretly hate it when they get it.
The Matrix uses the plea for vulnerability to identify the men who lack internal fortitude.
Wow. So if a man can't seek emotional support from society or his partner without losing respect, what is his antidote to the stress of modern life?
Absolute stoicism.
Stoicism.
He points readers directly to the ancient texts of the Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius and the formerly enslaved philosopher Epictetus.
The classics.
Right. Stoicism teaches a radical internal locus of control. You cannot control the chaotic, collapsing, irrational culture around you. You cannot control the laws or the mob.
But you have absolute dictatorial control over your reaction to it.
Yes. Riker states that a true patriarch processes his emotions internally, alone, or with trusted brothers. He absorbs the chaos of his household and presents an unshakable, stoic exterior to the world.
He must be the rock against which the waves of pathos break.
That is the exact ideal he's pushing.
Okay, so that covers the mind. Well, Riker goes incredibly hard on the physical aspect, too. And I want to push back on this a bit because it almost borders on obsession.
He is very focused on physical strength.
Very. He ties a man's intellect directly to his physical fitness. He absolutely blasts what he calls the neckbeard intellectual.
Right, the guy who maybe reads deep philosophy, maybe even agrees with Riker, but lives on processed food, plays video games 12 hours a day, and has the posture of a cooked noodle.
Exactly. Why is lifting weights framed as a philosophical and moral imperative here? Why does a rational mind supposedly need a muscular body?
Because to Riker, the mind and body are entirely inseparable. They are a single mechanism. He pulls from the ancient Greek concept of arete,
Arete.
which translates roughly to excellence or virtue, but specifically in the context of physical and martial excellence, fulfilling one's maximum potential.
So a weak body means what?
He argues that a weak, soft, undisciplined body is the undeniable physical manifestation of a mind that has already surrendered to the comforts and poisons of the gynocentric matrix.
Oh, I see.
If you are physically weak, your intellect is inherently compromised because
Right.
you lack the discipline to enforce your will on reality. You cannot defend the city of Logos, you cannot protect your family, if you can't walk up a flight of stairs without losing your breath.
It's like having a supercomputer running on a frayed, sparking power cord. You have to calibrate the biological machinery so the mind can operate clearly.
Exactly.
And to illustrate how society hates this physical calibration, he uses this bizarre but incredibly potent metaphor regarding the corporate gym chain, Planet Fitness.
Ah, yes, the lunk alarm.
It is perhaps the most memorable metaphor in the book. For listeners who might not know, Planet Fitness is a massive gym franchise that explicitly markets itself as a judgment-free zone.
Right.
To enforce this, they have an actual physical siren on the wall, the lunk alarm. If a member grunts from exertion, drops heavy weights, or pushes themselves too aggressively, the staff sounds this loud siren to publicly shame them.
And Riker sees this as the perfect, terrifying metaphor for the dying West.
He sees a feminized corporate institution literally sounding a police siren to publicly shame, punish, and expel male strength, aggressive physical exertion, and vitality.
It is the city of Pathos demanding that men remain quiet, docile, and physically weak so they don't intimidate anyone.
To combat this institutional pacification, he advocates for very specific, rugged physical pursuits.
Yeah.
He doesn't just say get in shape, he tells his readers to immediately sign up for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
To learn how to physically dominate another human being in combat.
Right. And he specifically mandates following Mark Repeto's starting strength program. This is a weightlifting protocol based entirely on heavy, compound barbell movements, squats, deadlifts, overhead presses.
The basics.
Riker writes this fascinating passage where he calls the barbell the modern Excalibur. He says it represents an unbending standard of truth against the force of gravity.
A 1,000-pound barbell doesn't care about your feelings.
Exactly. It won't adapt to your pronouns. Gravity is a patriarchal construct that demands absolute physical respect and adherence to biomechanical truth.
It's about anchoring oneself in objective, undeniable physical reality when the culture insists reality is subjective. But, he takes it a vital step further.
What's the next step?
It's not just about individual strength. A single strong man is easily isolated and destroyed. It's about rebuilding collective male strength.
Finding your tribe.
He points to the tragic decline and ideological capture of the Boy Scouts of America as a prime example of the Matrix actively destroying traditional male spaces. Spaces where older men pass down skills and moral frameworks to boys.
Because these legacy institutions have been hopelessly compromised, Riker argues that men must rebuild the fraternal order entirely outside the reach and surveillance of the state.
He calls for the creation of what he terms tactical cells.
Tactical cells. He's very clear that this is not a book club where you sit around, drink craft beer, and complain about feminism.
No, not at all. These are localized networks of 2 to 4 high-value men who train in combat together, pool financial resources to bypass traditional banking, learn hard survival and trade skills, and hold each other accountable.
Through brutal, uncompromising honesty. If a man in the cell fails to meet the standard, or acts weakly, the group aggressively addresses it.
It's about intentionally ending the atomized isolation that the modern system relies on to keep men depressed and compliant.
So, building a strong body and an unshakable stoic mind within a tight, unbreakable brotherhood is only step one. It prepares the individual.
But Riker's final chapters escalate this philosophy into a full, macro-level blueprint for completely decoupling from the gynocentric matrix, both in romantic relationships and in the broader economy.
Which brings us to the final and perhaps most radical section of his argument, relational dominance and the parallel economy.
Let's talk about the relationship advice here, because it is extremely blunt and leaves zero room for compromise.
Yeah, Riker calls for absolute authority in romantic partnerships. He tells men they must be the undisputed decision maker, the final word.
I can already hear the collective gasp from modern relationship counselors everywhere.
Oh, for sure. What evidence does he claim proves that the modern ideal of equality in relationships doesn't actually work in practice?
Well, he cites empirical data to back his philosophical claim. Specifically, he points to a widely publicized 2015 study published in the American Sociological Review, authored by sociologist Daniel Carlson.
Okay, what did the study look at?
This study looked at chore division in households and its impact on marital satisfaction and intimacy. According to Riker's interpretation of the data, couples who share traditionally female chores report the lowest sexual frequency and intimacy levels.
Wait, really? Doing the dishes kills the mood. I have to push back here. Correlation isn't causation. Couldn't it just be that couples who share chores are both working 60-hour weeks and are just too exhausted?
That is the standard sociological counterargument. But Riker uses this data point as absolute proof of his thesis that biological imperatives completely override egalitarian social conditioning.
So the modern matrix, through media and therapy, tells couples they must be 50-50 equals.
But Riker claims that when men actually adopt the submissive, accommodating, or egalitarian role, women subconsciously dry up. He argues that women biologically despise richness, compliance, and domesticity in a mate, even if they explicitly demand it verbally.
Therefore, he advises men to unapologetically screen out any women infected by leftist ideology and only partner with women who recognize and willingly submit to rational male leadership.
He summarizes it with a memorable line. The patriarch doesn't ask for a seat at the table of victimhood. He builds the table, owns the lumber, and dictates the laws of the household.
He owns the lumber. That is quite the visual, and it just encapsulates his demand for total sovereignty. But his rebellion goes far beyond who vacuums the living room. Let's explore the macroeconomic rebellion Riker suggests.
Because this is where his philosophy becomes an active threat to the state.
He actually advocates for men to strategically and purposefully withdraw their labor from the mainstream economic system.
He does. He looks at a demographic group that is constantly mocked and pathologized by modern society. The NEETs.
That acronym stands for Not in Education, Employment, or Training. Society brands young men who drop out of the workforce to live in their parents' basements as lazy, broken failures.
But Riker radically reframes this phenomenon. He calls it a highly rational, stoic rebellion.
Let me make sure I follow his logic, he's saying. Why should a young man break his back working 50 hours a week in a soul-crushing corporate cubicle just to pay massive taxes to a welfare state that actively despises his gender, mocks his nature, and uses his own confiscated money to fund policies that replace his demographic?
That's his logic, right? If the game is rigged, the most rational move is to stop playing.
Precisely. If the state is a parasite feeding on male labor to subsidize hypergamy and leftist ideology, the only logical move is to starve the parasite.
No, for the men who are too ambitious to just become NEETs, he offers a different path. Build parallel economies.
He urges men to utilize cryptocurrency and decentralized finance to completely bypass central banks and the Federal Reserve.
He advocates for a return to localized bartering for goods and services within those tactical cells.
He tells men who own businesses to legally structure their enterprises to absolutely minimize tax liabilities, utilizing every loophole to defund the government. He essentially wants men to become sovereign citizens, economically insulated from federal overreach.
And he genuinely believes the free market actually agrees with his view of male nature, despite what corporate HR departments say. He points to the corporate world as proof, bringing up the famous 2019 Gillette razor ad disaster.
Oh, that event is a perfect encapsulation of his thesis in action.
Procter & Gamble, the parent company of Gillette, released an advertisement that heavily parroted left-wing talking points. It essentially pathologized normal, traditional male behavior roughhousing, approaching women, asserting dominance under the blanket label of toxic masculinity.
While lecturing men to do better.
Right. And what was the real-world fallout of that moral grandstanding?
The fallout was catastrophic for the brand. Procter & Gamble eventually suffered an $8 billion write-down on the Gillette brand.
Riker points out that the free market punished them with ruthless, undeniable efficiency. Men instantly recognized the attack on their nature and boycotted the product.
But more importantly, to Riker's biological thesis, he argues that women subconsciously recoiled from the ad's portrayal of weak, apologizing, effeminate men. The market proved that attacking fundamental male nature is financial suicide, no matter how much praise the ad won from the cultural elites.
So the blueprint is clear. Men need to vote with their wallets, withdraw their taxes, fortify their bodies, and assert their domestic authority.
But Riker isn't naive. He knows that if men actually do this at scale, the state will eventually notice the drop in tax revenue and push back. And this is where the book takes a very dark, militant turn regarding physical defense. He relies heavily on the legal concept of the castle doctrine.
Yes, he focuses on laws like Florida's 2005 Stand Your Ground expansion, which removes the duty to retreat when faced with a threat in public or in your home.
Riker views these laws as the absolute last, hanging by a thread, legal bastions of patriarchal self-defense in a decaying state.
He argues that as the state continues to artificially inflate the status of criminals while punishing rational, law-abiding citizens, what anarcho-tyranny looks like, crime will inevitably skyrocket.
Furthermore, he issues a dire geopolitical warning.
A feminized, pacified West, obsessed with diversity quotas and emotional pronouns, is surrounded globally by highly patriarchal, aggressively expansionist cultures, whether that's Russia, China, or radical Islam.
He explicitly calls the modern Western military a pathetic paper tiger, overly concerned with maternity flight suits rather than lethality.
He does. And because he firmly believes the state will inevitably fail to protect its citizens during the coming economic or societal crash, which he views as a mathematical certainty, he mandates that men must use castle doctrine frameworks to aggressively fortify their localized networks.
They must prepare to defend their perimeters, their families, and their resources with lethal force, without a duty to retreat. It's a very Millicent, apocalyptic conclusion to his philosophy.
It really is. Stepping back to look at the massive scope of this book, Riker is essentially offering a unified field theory for the entire red pill and men's rights movement.
He manages to tie Aristotle's logic to the IRS tax code and the fall of the Roman Republic to modern dating dynamics and chore charts.
It is a sweeping, totally comprehensive worldview. It is explicitly designed to not just critique, but to entirely replace the mainstream narrative of Western history and sociology.
Which brings us to our final summary of the deep dive. Riker leaves the reader, and by extension you, the listener, with an ultimate, uncompromising binary choice.
He says the apologetic era is officially dead. You can no longer straddle the fence.
You either completely succumb to the feminine-coded emotional consensus of the dying matrix, where you remain atomized, heavily taxed, physically weak, and compliant to the city of pathos.
Or you ruthlessly reassert the masculine order of objective truth, physical dominance, and unapologetic patriarchal leadership to rebuild the city of Logos. You choose order or you choose chaos.
And this raises an important, final, provocative question for you, the listener, to mull over on your own as you digest this material.
If Riker's advice is actually taken at scale, if a massive, organized contingent of capable, physically fit men truly take his advice, drop out of the mainstream economy, and separate into localized, self-reliant tactical cells operating on a completely different epistemology than the mainstream culture, what happens when these two radically incompatible realities inevitably collide?
When the state demands its tax revenue to fund its systems, and these heavily armed, philosophically hardened tactical cells refuse to pay or comply.
That is a chilling thought experiment.
History shows us that a civilization divided into two fundamentally different realities, operating on different definitions of truth, cannot hold. Eventually, they clash over resources. And that clash is exactly what Conrad Riker is banking on and preparing his readers for.
Listeners, if you want to dig into this highly provocative, deeply controversial manual, if you want to test your own worldview against his arguments, head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books and pick up Patriots and Prophets by Conrad Riker.
And be sure to follow his ongoing thesis and essays. You can find him writing regularly on Substack at Conrad Riker. Follow his updates on Twitter at Conrad Riker, and watch his lectures on YouTube at Conrad Riker.
And please, if you value this kind of rigorous, impartial analysis of difficult texts, don't forget to like and subscribe to this deep dive. It is the absolute best way to help us continue to bring you these explorations.
We truly appreciate you taking this deep dive into these turbulent, controversial waters with us today. It requires a willingness to confront uncomfortable ideas.
Remember how we started? That grand cathedral slowly sinking into the swamp, maintained by people who refuse to acknowledge the rot.
Riker has just handed you a crowbar. He's telling you to rip up the floorboards, look at the mud for yourself, and start building a fortress on solid rock instead. Until next time, keep questioning the foundation.